Claws of Gold Derby here with Mark Tildesley. He's the production designer of the upcoming film, The Two Popes. And Mark, I think the first thing that anybody thinks about when they see this movie is how much of this was actually built as opposed to shot on location.
As you know, you can't actually film with a dramatic story inside the Vatican. You can go there and shoot documentaries. So it was obvious because one of the major sequences in the film is set inside the Sistine Chapel. That is something that we'd have to buy into. Also, we toured around the Vatican, within an hour outside Rome, and so we used, I'd say about a 60-40 build versus location relationship. So we went to various palaces. We went to Caserta for some of the Vatican. That's about an hour south of Rome. And then we used various other places. So we used a palace called Mondragone. We used a place called Caparola. And these are all buildings in Rome that are sort of the same period as the Vatican. And they're superb anyway. So we managed to mix that up. But in the end, we did have to build the Room of Tears. We had to build his offices. We had to build the Sistine Chapel. But things like the Pope's bedroom, that was done at Caparola, and we shot obviously all the gardens and other things on location. And we had to recreate his summer palace at Castle Gandolfo, and that we made up again from the same palaces. We used various places to dress, get some scale.
How important was it for you to get it right from a historical standpoint versus telling the story thematically through color and things like that?
Well, it's an interesting point because obviously Anthony McCartan's fantastic script, which is brilliant, is made up. The meeting between these two popes did occur. They met on 3 different occasions, but the actual dialogue, nobody knows exactly what was said. But nevertheless, it felt really important not to take people out of the movie in any way, in any dramatic way, that keep it as fresh and as real as possible. So I think in the way the film is shot, the way it's lit, it's very fresh, very open, and there's a documentary side to it where you're cutting between real footage, which we managed to get from the Vatican, and real news footage and stuff that we made up. So to keep it real and to keep it as honest as possible was definitely one of our ambitions.
I think that one of the ways in which your work is so integral to the story is that part of the conflict between these two popes is about the amount of money that's being spent, on these grand palaces like Benedict's summer home. And, you see Pope Francis looking around there like, look at all this money that we're wasting.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, no. So that was one of the things in the film, was that it's obviously, in terms of the different style of these two popes and their different politics, is that one had become Benedict had become mildly institutionalized. He is a theologian, bright theologian, but a man that had lived amongst that world of the Vatican for so long that he engaged with that. So we show that in the film in the costumes. So he wears the red slippers, he has very special clothes made, and jewelry, and he wears also these he just uses some of the very traditional costumes and things, which obviously Pope Francis, who obviously as a person who come from Buenos Aires in Argentina and spent much of his life fighting now for the rights of the poor and engaging with the poor, felt that this was inappropriate for him as a human being to be there. So we have these two sides, and that's shown in Bergoglio when he just wears his normal shoes and refuses in the end to change them, and he doesn't want to get involved with the massive jewelry and other such things. He keeps that all very simple. So so it was a very simple thing to draw, but there was this world of these two people to show where they started from. And the wonderful thing is that they managed to move on from that and engage with each other and, you know, essentially forgive each other and move forward in some way.
Right, and I think what's interesting is that you really do see that disparity between, you know, the glamour and the I don't want to say avarice, but you know, of the Pope and the cardinals and all this enormous wealth, and then the people who they are representing. You know, like especially Pope Francis's people. You know, you see him walking amongst the poor in all these these poor neighborhoods. You know, and you really do see that disparity between how each half lives.
Yeah, certainly. So that and we in a design sense when we basically we tried to follow the paths of these two people. So we did as much as we could within the Vatican, which is rather difficult, but we did get a couple of amazing tours and some incredible insights from people who are involved, you know, some advisors and some people off the record telling us what they could. But in Bergoglio's world, of his world, we went right back to his birthplace in Buenos Aires. We went to his home, his neighborhood. We went to the tango club where he worked as a bouncer. We went and indeed filmed in the parish church where he had his transformation, and also the college where he was the boss of the what do we call it, the seminary, Collegium Maxima, which is actually, so the scene where they remove the books in that sequence is actually the library where he did remove the things. So we follow that really closely, and in following Bergoglio's work in the favelas, the fiches, which are the sort of impoverished areas of Buenos Aires where he worked tirelessly, we realized that there was that they told their stories through pictures, you know, through their murals and paintings on the walls. So you see, as you go around, the heroes of their stories, you know, Father Mujica and other people that they painted in these sort of, in their own way, these local people. So we thought that was a sort of parallel between the Vatican with the Sistine Chapel at its centre and those important stories that those pictures were telling, and the pictures of the favelas, you know, as another symbol of these two worlds that would have to come together. So in the end, we opened our film with a sequence about a story which is obviously about St. Francis, which is the name that Bergoglio took as the Pope, Francis, and we followed the story of St. Francis, which is basically that he misunderstood the message of God, which God was asking him to rebuild the church, and he tried to do that with bricks and mortars. So we engage with a local group of artists who live and work in those favelas, and it's their home, so you can't just go and put pictures up on their walls. So we asked them to be involved and to help us design and make these images of the story of St. Francis, which you see in the opening sequences of the young people who are heading towards the mass in the favela.
You also delve into Francis's past a lot, so you know you get to do some period work. Talk a little bit about that. The whole sequence in South America, for me as a designer, I'm an Englishman. You know, I live in Britain, and that was an area that I read about and heard about, but didn't really understand. And I'm going to work with two of my friends, which is Fernando Morellis and Cesar Scialoni, who I've worked with before on The Constant Gardener, and we become close friends. And so I thought, oh my God, that is the challenge for me, really. Not the section in Rome, but to get to understand this sort of modern history. So we're taking Bergoglio's life from the 1950s right through the period of the 70s and the 80s and 90s and the junta. So I was very blessed to be involved with a very excellent partner in that section of the film called Mercedes Alfonsi, who's a designer in her own right and a brilliant historian, and she carefully guided me through that section. So yeah, we had to recreate Bergoglio's life as a young man. He was passionate about tango, which is obviously one of the national sports of Buenos Aires, or South America, of Argentina. So and he actually worked in a tango club, which we portrayed in the film.
And we went to. It's interesting that we went to again. I would have just gone in with the classic tango look, because I really didn't understand it. But it was much more like a family event, like a sort of. It wasn't. I mean, it's obviously incredibly sensual and extraordinary art form, the dance of the tango. And but actually, the way I was going to portray it, according to Mercedes, was completely wrong. So it was really nice to get her movement on it, that it was not quite so. Yeah, so we dealt with the 1950s, and then we dealt with obviously the junta and the position of Bergoglio as he was now the leader of the Jesuits in Argentina, and you know, he had a difficult relationship with the church, and that was a tricky thing to deal with for us because it was such a sort of recent history, and it's still incredibly raw. So when you go and speak to people in Argentina, although you know Francis. Because I'm personally, I'm a Catholic, I'm from a Catholic tradition, and this is a great breath of fresh air to have this Francis as our leader, right. For me. And so, but it was very interesting to hear some of the reactions from some of the people there, that they were, obviously, some of them felt they'd been betrayed by him, and it was, you know. So it was a very, very interesting and tricky experience to try and unravel that and produce those histories. So, you know, it's recreating some events that were very, very raw in people's minds. We had to do it very carefully. It was like a big public relations job to go in with the church, with the communities, and explain what we were doing and try and give them an impression without giving it all away about what the film was going to try and portray. And they were very generous, and the Argentinians were fantastically generous with us and allowed us to do this. So we then had to reproduce this. The event where some of the Jesuit priests that were under the rule of Bergoglio, they disobeyed his orders or decided that their mission to serve the poor and to take care of the poor was super important, and they had to remain in a dangerous position taking care of those people, because Bergoglio obviously understood that the junta were on the warpath and ready to take them on, which they did. They took them away, imprisoned them. So we had to go and deal with that sequence. We couldn't find a neighbourhood that matched that look anymore, because obviously the world's moved on and modernised. And we wanted not a big sequence. We wanted the sequence to move and have some action. So we had to move slightly outside and augment a large community. And again, these are impoverished communities. So we built a set of the Bavaria, which is where the priests were working out on this. I can't remember the name of the section, but it's about 25-30 minutes outside of, again, in a neighborhood outside of Buenos Aires city. Yeah, so we had the Bavaria and Plaza de Mayo, which is where the mothers came every week. Again, that's centrally a difficult thing. Actually, you know, standing in Buenos Aires as an Englishman, yeah, having obviously, you know, had a recent war with that country, although I politically opposed it and thought it was completely unnecessary and ridiculous, it's still incredibly raw to stand there, and
felt that,
yeah, and it felt quite tough at times to imagine that you know, that had gone on. It was a super silly and unjust situation, but well, that's my opinion. But, right. Yeah. Yeah, so that side of that whole film was fascinating, as you say, to go back into its recent history and try and portray that carefully and represent it properly. Yeah, it was a great privilege to do that, really. And I loved that country. I'm very attached to it more so.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure shooting there probably
amazing.
Yeah. You mentioned Fernando Meirelles you've worked with before. What is that collaboration like between the two of you?
Oh, he's a joy. Yeah. So the first time I worked with Fernando, obviously now I'd been to see City of God, which blew me sideways, and then my partner Tracy was producing, was working with Fernando on the Concert Garden, and I just she said, I think she said something like, "I'll leave my handbag if you don't like Mark." So he was forced.
Yeah.
So I arrived to have an interview with him, and I was yeah, he is so lightweight and so not what you imagine. You know, he's a real gentleman and very, very kind and open. And we had a great discussion. Obviously, we went to work on the concert garden, which turned out to be a really interesting experience for me. He and Cesar Shaloni, who's the camera person on this film and on the concert garden, they're very, very tight, and they worked a lot together in South America. And you know, I'd been working in the British European film industry, and it was just refreshing to work with them because they're so light on their feet, you know, which is born out of their traditions, which is, you know, they don't have enormous amount of resources and tons of lighting or else they can do that stuff, no problem. But you know, their first choice was to sort of keep the thing as honest and simple as possible, you know, and find out the facts and then move on from there, you know. And yeah, that type of filmmaking was, for me, that type of filmmaking is super refreshing. So, you know, they just use a light bulb and some natural light and a real location, you know, in a Nan Goldin type way. They go to the place rather than dress it, design it, make it. You know, they go to the real thing, and it sort of gives a sort of integrity and honesty to the filmmaking that makes it strong. You know, and both of those movies, I think, are very, very powerful. You know. For that reason.
So you are an Emmy winner for your work on the 2012 Olympic Games opening ceremony, which you worked with on Danny Boyle on. Right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about not just that recognition, but I mean, like, that was a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how did that compare to doing a feature film?
Yeah, no, that was a massive event and a great privilege. Danny rang me up one day, and I trained as a theatre designer, and I hadn't really worked in the theatre for a long time. And on the same day, Danny rang me up. He said, "I've got a couple of ideas." Yeah. And he said, "I'm going to do this play at the National Theatre, Frankenstein, and do you fancy doing the Olympic opening ceremony?" So I said, "Oh, that's the truth." And strangely enough, it's a really interesting thing because when he said it to me, obviously I was like, you know, he's a very close friend, and so I was absolutely going to get involved with both of them. And it was, but the thing is with the Olympics, I thought, oh, this would be amazing. I'll have all the resources around and everything. But no, it's a really difficult job. You know, it's super politicized. So you know, there's money coming from the government, and you know, so they want to make sure that, you know, without being too heavy, that they you know, you're not saying anything that they don't like.
Right.
And so yeah, so there was it was quite a job, and you know, the budget for the Olympics in proportion is less than a big feature film. You know, it's like, so people think, oh, there must be all these resources available, but in fact it isn't. But there's an enormous amount of goodwill and an enormous amount of wonderful experience, and I think, you know, with Danny at the helm, you know, he did make us proud to be British for one day. No, really, genuinely, because I think you know, what tends to happen in those worlds is whenever the British celebrate something, you know, it inevitably involves the armed forces and some marching band and some horses. You know, every royal occasion, everything. There's all this history of stuff, and it doesn't really present us as a nation. You know, so the title, "The Isles of Wonder," you know, it's about this sort of idiosyncratic nation of people, small nation of people that can be super inventive at times, you know, when they want to be, and so they have other things to bring to the table than warring, which is obviously one of our specialist subjects. So in that sense, it was really exciting to sit down in a room and just say, there was myself. There's another designer, co-designer called Sutarat Lalabai, or Anne. And Sutarat's from New York. She's from LA, actually. She's based in New York, but she worked with Danny a few times, and she dealt more in the end with the costumes. But we co-designed this whole experience with a couple of other people in a room. And we had the Olympics at one end, and we had Frankenstein, the play, at the other end. Yeah. And we were doing that, and then we did a film in the middle of it all as well. So what I was going to say was that it was like really fascinating to sit in the room and ask yourself the question: what really makes up this nation? You know, what makes the heartbeat of this nation? And we're quite a complicated mix, obviously, because we're obviously trying to not make it too London central, but it is the London Olympic Games, so it was very fascinating. And so we sort of sat down and sort of said things like, so who are the great icons that travel around the world for the UK? And you go, well, sadly one of them, not sadly, but one of them was the Queen. She's well known, and the other might be James Bond. So then we had a whole afternoon working out how we might involve those two in a sequence.
And you're working on the new James Bond movie too, so that's all.
Yeah, no, that's too. I got to work on it for real.
Yeah.
As well. I remember, says you're not supposed to give up tell people anything about what you're doing on these things. Obviously, you're supposed to be signed to secrecy. But Fernando came for supper one evening at our house in London with Tracy, and he obviously was just asking me about things. I thought, I'll just tell him. I said, yeah, no, we're going to get the Queen to jump out of an aeroplane with James Bond, and he just laughed at me because it was preposterous and ridiculous, and that obviously not going to happen. And Mark, I know what you're like. You're just actually winding me up. So, and then he rang me once he saw it and said, no, you did in some way do that anyway. So it was a real privilege to make the opening ceremony with Danny, who's a great collaborator and friend and brilliant artist in many aspects. So and then I went on to do the Bond movie, sadly with Danny, but unfortunately he didn't finish it because he wanted to take it a slightly different way from what Barbara and her team were thinking, but they ended that. It was a nice finish to that relationship. It wasn't difficult, it was just difference of opinion. And so then I managed to hook up with a countryman, Kerry Fukunaga, who's cool, and he came over, and I was going to do the handover to him, and then he asked me, he said, no, you're not handing over. Can you do this with me? So we did that together, and then we finished that two or three weeks ago. So he's now editing in London.
Well, I look forward to that. Mark, thanks so much for your time.
Lovely speaking to you.
Lovely speaking to you too. Congratulations.
Yeah, take care.